Welcome to Cultivated Live for Thursday, June 20th. That sounds right. I'm Jay Rosenthal. I am the co-founder of Cultivated Media and the host of Cultivated Live. And since we launched last November, our goal at Cultivated has been to be cannabis industry first, providing you with the most important, insightful, useful, and timely information. We do that through our daily newsletter, Cultivated Daily. We do that through our daily live stream, Cultivated Live. So please subscribe to LinkedIn, YouTube, our newsletter at cultivated.news, because we like to stay in good touch. On Thursdays on this program, I am joined by my friend, Krista Raymer. She is the founder and CEO of Vetrina. They are the foremost cannabis retail consultancy in the industry and all around good people. Krista, welcome.
Thanks, Jay. You're like a little under the weather today.
I feel a little slow today. I'll tell you what it is, to be quite honest. It's allergies. Like, it's so bad, and made worse, I think, by coaching Little League. The dust of Little League is really bad, and the weather's been awful here. It was like, I mean, nobody cares, but it was so, and it's still so hot here in Toronto. Yeah. And we had a terrible rainstorm, and then it's like hot again. It's yeah, so I don't feel great. So thanks for calling it out.
Well, you're looking great. That's all that matters.
Well, the look never changes. If you wear the same t-shirt and hat every day, people just think you're like rinse and repeat, or I guess I should rinse it and then repeat it. Krista, you wrote something on LinkedIn this morning, and I've heard you talk about these things before, but I want you to clarify. You're talking about product hierarchy.
Yeah.
That's one thing. And then what's the other one? Oh, naming convention. Yes. Those two things. Sorry. See, I really am. Naming convention, product hierarchy. I could tell you what I think they are, but describe them to me, and then we'll think of some real world analogies outside of cannabis.
Sure. So the product hierarchy, let's start there. It's the way that we organize the inventory. This, if you're working on a POS system, this starts to impact the product masters or the way that the product gets created within the system. And then a naming convention is literally, or the taxonomy of the product is literally the way that the name shows up, both for the customer, online, in store, for bud tenders. And so both of these become tools to be able to better see how inventory is performing, what is selling, and it can influence a lot of parts. But I think one of the opportunities that we see as a missed opportunity is that naming convention piece.
Yeah. And I think of naming conventions most often as like when people have files on their computer.
Right.
That's how I think about it. And I know I've worked in places where you want actual naming conventions. I worked at an agency, and please don't go look at my LinkedIn about which agency it was, where the naming conventions were just all over the place, even in like the master drive. Like, is that a good analogy or a bad analogy?
It's a great analogy. It's like, depending on how clear the name is, it can be really difficult for the customer or for your bud tenders or for when you're doing an inventory review to see that product clearly. So I'll use an example. We were working with a retailer, and they've got some short form name versions, but the customer doesn't necessarily know the short form of the product name. And so therefore we should be extending it because that's the way that the name is going to show up on the website. So these systems are all intertwined. How they show up on the receipt, how they show up on an e-commerce menu are all going to be impacted by the way that the naming convention shows up. So it's really important to get a naming convention that reinforces and services both your team as well as your customer.
And in traditional retail, so non-cannabis retail, like are there companies that do it well? Can you give an example of sort of what you've seen in the world where you're like, oh, this is how, I don't know, Winners or Marshalls or Nordstrom's, or like, are there ones that like are like industry leaders in their own industry?
I mean, if you were to take a look at grocery, a lot of them have a great example of a naming convention because they have brands that have similar types of products.
Right.
So say, for example, you might have like organic and non-organic blueberries, both are blueberries. And the problem with the not having a clear naming convention is if in a year from now we didn't organize and give the right attributes, it's hard to see what was maybe the organic or not the organic one. And so clear organization of inventory or clear naming conventions support you today. And everybody looks at it as like, okay, like let's service our customer today. But a year from now, when you want to do a basket analysis and see what customers were purchasing at this time this year, but for next summer, you want to be able to clearly see what products were being purchased together. And so, unless you have some other history of all of the features and attributes of a product, it's helpful to include some of those into a naming convention to be able to make the recall better. Making the assumption that it's you and me looking at that data, but the reality is it's likely to be somebody else. And so we want to leave as many hints as we can within the way that we record information. So actually, like on my LinkedIn post, we gave an example for what that looks like for flower. And basically it's to include what the category of the product is, what the subcategory is, what the brand is, if we're including strain or flavor profile, if that's important to us, package size or package type, and then package size. And we do that for every single product, and that way you are comparing like for like names, and can see everything clearly.
Krista, I often this comes up a lot, like when we talk to sort of regulatory consultants, when we talk to new operators, there is so much emphasis on getting the store open, like
yeah,
everything, and then there's like, I feel like a lot of times there's a mad rush to like open the doors because you want to bring revenue, but also you're so excited to open the doors. And this seems to me like, what are our naming conventions going to be, and even what our product hierarchy is going to be like? It seems to me like that would be something that you always think you're going to get to next, but is always like, it would be so much better to take, I don't even know how long it takes, but like take time before you even open, because then it's really setting you up for success, as opposed to like going back into 3 years and trying to figure out why you're even naming things that way. Like this seems to be something like a good planning process prior to opening your doors. And if you've not done it, do it as soon as possible.
Totally. It is super, super helpful to set it up this way at the beginning, but it's never too late. As new products come in, you could always install a new naming convention and update accordingly and work through your catalog. But if you set it up from day one, you'll have a much clearer record. And to your point, most of the time it's like, okay, we bought our inventory. Okay, scan it in, get it set up in the POS. We'll figure out our POS. We'll train all of our bud tenders. And within like 3 days, we're open to the public. And that is a big, big opportunity or a miss, because you've got so much change that happens in the first 6 months of a retail environment that it's helpful to have the information organized in a way that you can see the patterns clearly.
And that's from like, I mean, that's of course how the products are organized in store for my customers, for me. But let's talk about product hierarchy, because I think we're talking about naming conventions. Like, is that, well, tell me what that is. Sorry.
Yeah, it's just breaking up your inventory into smaller groupings so that you can see patterns. And I use this example with flour all the time, is that you have a very large category that has a lot of SKUs. In some instances, it's going to represent like 40 to 50% of all SKUs in store. So we're talking about usually somewhere between 150 to maybe 400 SKUs. And it's like, how do you identify patterns within a data set that's that big? Like on an Excel sheet, you're just flowing through rows.
Right.
And so we want to break it up into smaller pieces so that we can see those patterns. And so you want to break it up into smaller pieces that have like attributes. So it could be something, say, for example, like size, that is the first attribute, or it could be maybe even something like bud appearance could be another, where it's like whole bud, smalls, or shake and trim. Breaking it up into those smaller pieces, then you can see patterns. And so the goal of this, and why this is like a big call out right now, as we go into summer, we always see that sativa product is underserviced from an inventory perspective. Now, it could be partially inventory availability, but it also is likely that we're unable to see that in the patterns clearly. And that's probably because we have too much data. So we use the example of like, you pour Skittles out on a table, and I'm like, how many blue Skittles do you have compared to red? And you're like, I have no idea. You would organize it by color first. And then you might even come up with like another way to organize it. Could be, perfectly shaped Skittles versus misshaped or whatever that example is.
Right.
And that would then give you a easier way to tell me how many blue you have in reference to red. And that's something that we need to look at is what are our sales look like and how many SKUs do we have to be able to support those sales specifically.
And until or unless you break it down that way, you just can't get to that level of comparison or even
yeah. It's harder to see, and especially if you don't have the attributes clearly identified, like how do you even know if you had those parts? And so it's a bit of it can be a black hole really easily.
And it could be, sativa, but it also could be we don't have enough 3.5 gram packet. Like it could be any of those categories. You'd be able to see what the spread is on all of them.
Yeah, and your hierarchy should be linked to like what is going to differentiate your inventory. So if, say, for example, if I'm a retailer and I fundamentally believe we have a curated, super interesting strain menu, then I might want to make considerations around how I organize by strain. But if I, say, for example, have a price sensitive customer and I believe that the price of the product is more influential than some of the product features and attributes, I might want to organize by price tier or even size of package. And so it should be linked, your hierarchy should be linked back to how you want to differentiate your assortment.
Yeah. There's a lot to think
about. Yeah.
There's a lot to think about. No, because I'm even thinking about it just in the shops that I shop in, right? And I don't know if they've given the same level of detail or thought to what you're talking about, or even, you would know better, but like how frequently they look at that and say, okay, we think we're underserviced here, over-indexed here. How do we make that work? Because unless or until you actually do those breakdowns, you may never know.
Yeah, it's hard to see. Yeah. It's really hard to see. And one of the things that we would say is the measurement of this is opportunity cost. It's like, we talk a lot about SKU rationalization and getting those products that you made a purchase of and aren't selling out the door as quickly as possible. But also, like, how do you measure the opportunities that you might have had that if you don't have any sell through? Right. And that's where retail's hard is. It's usually historical review of what happened based off of what was in store, not what could have happened.
Right. It's a little bit like, that'd be a good title for this segment every Thursday. Retail's hard. Let's make it a little bit easier with Krista.
That's a good title. I like that.
Well, hard. I mean, even doing it really well and is hard. Doing it well and profitably is a whole nother thing. Doing it well and profitably over time with the shifting dynamics of the industry that we're in and the regulatory environment, like it's layer upon layer of challenge. It's amazing anybody wants to get into it.
It's great business. It's like at the end of the day, it's about how all of these pieces work together. And so if you can give them structure, not like on any other business, if you give a business structure and some systems, that will make it much easier. And so these are structures and systems that can be applied to, say, for example, inventory and assortment, but there are other ones for other areas of the business as well.
Yes, hiring, training, merchandising, all the other things too.
Yeah.
But this is directly obviously to the products that you're selling and having them organized, categorized in a way that is actionable in real time and then reviewable and actionable over time. Seems to be one of the foundations of success, I would imagine, that it's hard to do exceptionally well without this type of thought put in advance.
Accurate. I would agree.
Yeah.
I think we're in a place where we're seeing more and more of this, where we are seeing smaller, say, for example, categories or subcategories or different ways retailers are breaking it up. So it's a path for retailers who've been open and operating. Yeah. But we still see kind of like the big chunky categories being installed into retailers in new markets.
And those chunks are too big.
Way too big.
Yeah. Like flour is too big. Even pre-rolls are too big. Like even with take the example of pre-rolls. Pre-rolls are a huge chunk, but there's multi-packs. There's ones that have teeny tiny dog walkers, ones that are 1 gram. Like, that's not apples to apples. You got to get to apples in order to make actionable decisions.
Totally. If any category has more than 20% of the SKUs for the whole store in it, we have an opportunity to break it up into a smaller category.
Huh. And like something like beverages, like how would you break up beverages? Is it high dose, low dose? Is it multi-pack? Like what, like how would you do something like give an example around that?
I mean, for beverages, depending on the retailer, you might not need to because of the size of the category and what it represents. You probably
Small.
can like pull the data and you only have a certain number of, rows in terms of inventory, and it's easy to kind of keep track of that. It would be about how you make decisions about that inventory that comes in as opposed to how you organize it. Say, for example, with edibles, a big thing is just like differentiate gummies versus other products.
Yeah.
Gummies are going to represent usually like north of 50% of the edible category sell through, and therefore, like, give it a subcategory, for
Right.
example.
Yeah. Oh, see, you are making it simpler for us.
One step at a time.
In my imaginary dispensary that I'm opening, I'm going to put all the thought in up front. So we run from day one. That's like super gangbusters. How's that sound?
Sounds great. We should be keeping like a wall of things that we've talked about and topics.
It's not a bad idea. I'll put it together maybe for next time because
Like a
I
mind
do.
map.
It is like I've had this conversation with you outside of things, but like the idea of like a pillar store. That's like, I know that I'm from Natick, Massachusetts. That's the home of TJX, which is Marshalls and TJ Maxx and a couple of other brands that are only like in test markets. But I always see those are the markets, those are the stores, the ones in Natick and Framingham, Massachusetts, that actually do really interesting things. And sometimes like, what the hell is that? And it never rolls out anywhere else. And sometimes it's like they're doing really gangbuster things and then they start rolling them out, even here like at Winners and Marshalls. Like we should set up that test dispensary to test things and get it right from the get-go.
Well, if anybody here who's listening or watching and you want us to run a test store, we are happy to do it.
Yeah, well, I'll set up the studio. Well, as long as it's close to my house, I'll set up the studio there. We'll do it every day. We'll get people in. Be a whole thing. I like this idea.
Just you and I go at adjusting a store and get it to perform.
Well, I think they probably want you doing that, less so me, since you're the one that knows what you're talking about. I know only everything that you've taught me. But it is the thing. These are the things that differentiate well-run / profitable retail enterprises versus ones that don't. And it even gets like, and then you think of like more than one shop. It's like essential that you do it across and through your whole enterprise.
This is like margin optimization games. These strategies are helpful from the day that you set up, but these are really, really about being able to regain margin where it is and the profitability of that margin as well.
Yeah. Krista, as always, I do learn a lot from you on Thursdays. I appreciate you and appreciate the time. I'm not sure we can do this next Thursday. I'm going to be on a little bit of a road trip, but I will double back. We may do a greatest hits next Thursday. So stay tuned for that announcement as well. But Krista, thank you so much for joining us here today. Tomorrow, we have something exciting. Give me one sec. We have Lex Corwin, who is the CEO of Stone Road, is joining us tomorrow for this program. And I think Lex is going to be on the West Coast. So it'll be very early for Lex to join us in the morning, but that will be exciting for us. And that'll be 10 a.m. tomorrow, Friday morning, the 21st, which I think is the first official day of summer, even though it's been hot as anything here in Toronto. So that's exciting. Krista, thank you so much for joining us here today. Please follow us on LinkedIn. Subscribe to us. Subscribe to us on YouTube. It's down over there somewhere. You can follow us on Twitter. Today I'm streaming to my Twitter handle, so thank you for joining there. Thank you, Amber Craig, for giving us a shout out during the actual program. Krista, as always, thanks so much. We'll see you, if not next week, the week after.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes.